Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of the High Grade Podcast. It's your girl Chanel.
And also your girl Shinnel.
Today's episode we're going to be talking about at what point are we good enough. So let's get straight into it. Chanel, what does it mean by being good enough?
I think first of all, it depends on when you say good enough in what aspect of life, because I think that can apply to personal, financial, work, career, personal development. So it depends.
But do you think it could be almost a universal thing? Do you think someone can feel not good enough in one aspect? If you have that feeling of not being good enough, I would have thought that maybe that it would be a common theme. Whereas if you feel, yep, I'm good enough, you would feel good enough in everything. Or what's your thoughts?
I think so. For example, at work, I would say that I'm quite confident knowing that I am good enough.
Yeah.
At work, but then actually in my finances, for example, that there's room for improvement, and I would say that I'm not good enough in that aspect. So I think it maybe depends on what area of your life we're discussing. But if you're talking about work, because that's the area that I feel good enough in, at what point did I realize I was good enough? I would say pretty much in my first year I knew I was good enough, and there's like, I'm not saying that to like toot my own horn, but I was getting praise from the people who were managing me. I was getting praise from people who were very high up the school hierarchy. So then when I was getting the acknowledgement and the reputation for, oh yeah, Chanel, she's good, I then realized, yeah, I'm good enough to be here. But then why do I need someone to acknowledge me and my work in order to feel good enough?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
It's almost being good enough to their standard. So you have now accustomed yourself to being good enough to their standard, rather than maybe from the onset just being like, do you know what, I've worked hard.
Yeah.
I got a first at uni. I've got to this position by myself. That and enough. I'm good enough. I don't need anyone to tell me or give me praise.
I think it's probably just the way that society is built and set up, that we are trained to think that being good enough means having something to show. So
yeah,
whether that's money, status in a job, whether that's a business or whatever it is, we are trained to say that I'm good enough, and I'm good enough because I have this. So we have to have something tangible to show why we're good enough. And I think, why do we need to be accepted by other people first before we can then accept that we're good enough just in general? Like, why can't we just say, yeah, I'm good enough despite what other people think? Is that a question of like self-worth?
I think yes and no. Obviously you have to, I think it's confidence, I think it's self-worth, I think it's just what society has taught us, like you said, that you have to have something tangible. But really we need to ask the question, do we have to have something to be worth something?
I think beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and if the beholder, to them, they have something, and because they have something, they're going to look at you with the same lens, if that makes sense. So if they have something tangible, and that something tangible to them is what means success, or that means that they're good enough, they're going to look at you through that same lens and judge you by their standards. So say the quote again.
Do you have to have something to be worth something?
So I think initially no, but to people who may be looking at you, yes, if that's their standard and how they judge themselves.
Yeah, but then we're almost going back to the question that we're only good enough or worth something through someone else's eyes, and we should be good enough or worth something through our own eyes, because what does someone's opinion do to us or for us?
I think that's a really thought-provoking question, because when I think about it, I'm always going to bring it back to work, because for work, that's the way I can relate to it, and probably for a lot of you relating to it, and that's an experience that's very much so current in my life, so I can always draw on that experience. So this year I moved to a different school. I'm in a completely different role, so I'm a head of sixth form, and it's a huge step up from what I was doing before. Now I don't get praise, or I don't get as much praise for the work that I'm doing, but despite that, I still know and can say confidently that I'm good enough without having that. But I think once you've been given the confidence almost to feel like you're good enough, no one can take that away from you, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to believing in your own source. Even if you needed the praise
100%,
initially,
100%.
because you've gone into something that's really new, you're the new fish in the pond, and obviously you have to make your mark.
Yeah.
But like I said, you have to believe in your own source.
100%.
And I think you've got to the point now where you do.
Yeah, I'm very confident in my abilities, my ability to work and how I come across at work. I'm confident in my ability to teach and all of the things that come under my job description. And so I don't feel like anyone could tell me otherwise. Shinnel, you're not good enough. Yeah, I don't think anyone could say that to me, because I would like look at them and say, are you joking? Literally.
Do you think there's any aspects of your life to flip the coin that you're not good enough in? It doesn't have to be job wise, doesn't have to be business wise, but is there any aspect of your life where you still don't feel like you are good enough?
I think it really depends on what your standard is though, isn't it? Because if you've set the bar for yourself here.
But yeah, so subjectively, based on your standards, are there any aspects in your life that you feel like you're not good enough? And maybe why?
I wouldn't say not good enough, just not where I want to be.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily mean I'm not good enough, because I feel like I'm good enough to get where I need to be. I'm just not there yet.
Yeah.
So I think if you're asking me, do I believe that I can be good enough? Yes. And I wholeheartedly believe in my abilities and my drive and all of that sort of stuff. But I think that's different to, am I there yet? Because again, this is a journey. So I 100% believe in myself. But I think this idea of not being good enough also stems from what you see around you. So we're surrounded by people in all aspects of our life, whether that's social media or at work or just in day-to-day life. People around us are more skilled, have better cars than us, have a bigger house than us, look better than us, have the better clothes, have the better shoes. And so if you look at them and consistently compare yourself, then I don't think you're ever going to feel good enough, which is why I think it's so important to be confident in your source and be your biggest fan, because if you're not going to do it, no one else is.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that you are the only person you need to be good enough for.
Definitely.
You don't have to be good enough for anyone else other than yourself. So like you said, don't really compare yourself to anyone. If I was to answer that question, do I feel good enough? I think I would just reiterate what you said in terms of I genuinely believe in my own ability. I think that with hard work and with skills and with knowledge and all of the things that I know I can acquire, that I'm going to get to where I need to get.
Yeah.
I think where I kind of sit and think, is because I'm not there yet. So you think, yeah, I am good enough, but I'm not where I want to be. So it's not a question of if I'm good enough, because I have the belief in myself. Yeah, I know that I'm good enough to get to where I need to be, but it's more of a case of
you're still on the way.
I'm still on the way. So it's like, it's not a question of not being good enough. I don't know how to phrase it. It's more
like you're good enough for the journey.
Yeah.
And you're on the journey and it has not yet ended.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah. So, yeah.
But what do you think of, or what advice would you give to people, for example, who consistently always just doubt themselves and compare themselves to others? And because I think when you go down this hole of questioning yourself, am I good enough? Like, you look at someone else, am I good enough? Because, you know, when you're alone with your thoughts, sometimes that's at night, you're in bed and like your mind is going at 100 miles per hour. And sometimes those things do pop into your head, because there has been times and occasions where I've questioned myself and questioned, am I good enough? But what advice would you give to people who think that they aren't good enough?
So I think you need to set your own standard. So if your standard is you want to be 10 out of 10, then...
For your weekly dose of that 10-10.
I didn't even do that on purpose. If your standard is 10 out of 10, or if your standard is 5 out of 10, then that is your standard. Don't look to anyone else.
It wouldn't be 5 out of 10 though, would it? It would be 5 out of 5, because that's your standard, isn't it?
That's good, yeah. So if your standard is 5 out of 5, that's your standard. Be very confident what you want. What do you want out of life? Because anything else that you look at, and people have got the newest car and the newest trainers and they've got this filler in their face and they look amazing and whatever, or natural beauty or whatever it may be, that stuff shouldn't concern you, because you know a very clear goal that I need to get here, so I'm only concerning myself with the things that I need to concern myself with.
But then does that then say that if your standard, let's say that the universal standard is 10 out of 10, right? But you've said to yourself, I'm happy with being 5 out of 5. So you're a 5 out of that 10. Is that then a different story of you having low standards rather than you not feeling good enough? So you've lowered your standards so you feel good enough.
But I think low standards is subjective. Low standards to you may not be low standards to me. High standards to you may be low standards to me. Low standards to me might be. So it's subjective. You're so you might think, okay, to have high standards, I need a detached house, a nice car, I don't know, family, successful business. That might be high standards to you, but someone else's high standards might be, I'm in a full-time job and I'm really happy, I live a modest life, and the family are fed, the children are fed, and we're all happy. Like, it depends so I don't know, I don't agree. I think everyone's low and high standards is completely subjective to.
But do you think it's possible that people look at others and say, there's no way that I'm going to reach that standard, so they lower their own so that they feel good enough within their own surroundings?
Yeah, probably. But then again, it's if they feel good enough and they're happy at that point, it's a problem where you think that you can't get there because you're not good enough. Yeah. Whereas Agreed. if you look at someone, we all look at someone, whether we have reached the peak or not, where we think, oh, like it would be good to have their life. Like, I look at Richard Branson. I would love my own island, but I don't feel not good enough if I don't have it. Yeah. So I think that's not the issue. The issue is when you don't feel good enough and you put yourself down and you piss on your own sauce because you don't believe that you can get there. Yeah. Success has almost become the holy grail to pursue, and the only thing worth pursuing is success.
I think it's a tough one because I think, again, success means different things to different people. So success is subjective. What is my idea of success is going to be different to yours. But I think if you've tried something and you failed so many times, but then your friends have succeeded at that one thing that you've tried, does that mean that you're not good enough? Does that mean that you're not worthy of praise for trying? Do you know what I mean? And I think a lot of this sort of just plays into the idea that we have to be someone or have something to show for in order to feel like we're good enough, when actually that shouldn't be the case. And I think we judge ourselves on how much money we've got. We judge ourselves based on how much we have in comparison to other people. And it's always about what I have is different to someone else, or what I have is not the same as someone else, when actually that's the wrong place to focus your energy. It shouldn't be about what you do or don't have in comparison to someone else. It should be about what you do and don't have in terms of what you see as good for you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it's important to also, if we touch upon the people that start something, for example, or may do their driving test or anything like that, and they fail at it again and again and again, and then they come to a conclusion of, oh, I'm just not good enough. I can't do this. I'm not good enough. And so many times we accept it as true. We never critically analyze the beliefs that we have. So whether you feel like you're not good enough, whether you feel like you can't do something by someone else's standards, we never actually sit and critically analyze those beliefs and actually get to the root of that belief. We just accept it as true. We accept that we're not good enough. We accept that we can't do something. So I think if you ever have feelings of that, it'd be good to actually analyze where these beliefs come from and what truth there is to those beliefs.
Do you think people might have had like an experience, could be traumatic or not, that has happened in their life in the past that has almost ingrained in them that they're just not good enough? Because I think when we say at what point are we good enough, this can mean anything to different people. It means different things to different people. And like I said in the beginning, when you asked me that question, well, do you mean good enough in what aspect of my life? And so I think when people sit down and analyze that, it might be good to look at the wheel of life.
Yeah.
So maybe you can explain it better than me.
Well, I'll try. So the wheel of life basically just covers different aspects of your life. So for example, some of the elements are health, family, career, personal development, I think is on there as well. So essentially it's divided up. Now you have to mark on the graph where you feel like you are. Now we may look at friends and family. Now I may feel like I don't make enough time for my friends and family, or I don't see them enough, or I don't think the connections are that strong. And if I believe that, or I will mark quite low on the little pizza slice. Now the one next to it health. I might think, yep, I prioritize my health. I'm really healthy. I'm in good health. I don't catch colds very often. I go to the gym a lot. So I might mark that quite highly. Now you do that for all the elements in the wheel of life, and then you join them up. What was you saying, Chanel, about the wheel of life?
So I think that idea of the wheel of life, it shows us in what areas obviously we feel like we're lacking, and then we can obviously work towards becoming good enough in that particular area. I think the whole idea of good enough or not good enough is almost like the wrong battle to fight in our minds, because this idea of feeling good enough is not what we should be focusing on. Why are we striving to be good enough? Why not try to exceed that and be excellent? Because I feel like we chase being good enough like that's a good enough standard.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, 100%. Just say it for like, I don't know, to put it into perspective, you're sitting your exams, a C is a pass. That's good enough. But why are you not getting that A star?
Correct.
So that is how you would see it. Why are we not stretching ourselves? But that's the thing, is it really you that wants it, or are you doing it for the acceptance of society? Yeah. Because if you're trying to be good enough, if you're really pushing yourself, you'd want to be more than good enough.
I think a lot of us, we are driven by the self-worth that people give us, and that can be via praise, that can be via recognition, acceptance, whatever that may be for different people. And I think we have to just accept that some of us, most of us, are driven by one of those three things. Because I think if I've done a good job at work, I'm expecting someone to tell me that I've done a good job. Not that it doesn't make me feel good enough, because I'm already confident in my ability. But if you're someone who is not confident in their ability and needs that praise to know that they're good enough, and if you're not giving that to that person, they may fall into that hole of, oh, am I good enough? Am I not good enough? I worked really hard on this project and I didn't get the praise. And then you start second guessing yourself. So I think we need to learn to cope without those things, but also on the flip side, people should give credit where credit is due so that people can feel good enough. But then I'm just still stuck on this idea of chasing being good enough, because it's almost like you start here.
I don't think you're ever, if you're chasing that continuously, I don't think you're ever going to be good enough. You're not going to, I don't think you're going to get to a point where you're like,
I don't know,
I feel good now. There's going to be, you say you look to someone, you might look to someone and you think, oh, I want to get to their level and then I'll feel good enough. You're going to get to that level, and I think you're going to look to the person on the next level.
But that's the thing, it's like, so for example, for myself in my career, I definitely feel good enough, and if I was that way inclined, because I feel good enough, I would just stay in the position that I'm in because I feel good enough to do my job. But we shouldn't chase just good enough, because that to me leads to stagnation, where we just stay stagnant. Once we reach the point of good enough, you know, it's comfortable, it's accepted by people around us because we're not bad, we're good enough for us to pass through life. But that's what leads to stagnation. And I think it's in our natural nature as humans to be comfortable. We don't like change, but to be better than good enough, to exceed that, we need to really push boundaries and you know, almost reach for the stars. So it's not about reaching the point of good enough, it's going above and beyond that. And I think it starts with self-belief, belief in your source. But then once you've reached that point where you know you don't need acceptance from anyone else, you know you don't need praise or recognition from anyone else, forget being good enough, rise to the top.
But it's being good enough by your own standard, or surpassing that good enough by your own standard. I think what happens a lot is that people are judging themselves against other people, and that's when the feeling of inferiority comes from. I genuinely believe you have to set your own standard, set your own goals. Where do you want to go? What do you want to achieve? And make sure that you are good enough, if not better, to achieve that, rather than looking at someone, looking at your peers, your friends, and thinking, oh, I'm not as good as them.
So Shan, what would you say to our listeners, our viewers, as always, last word or tip or advice that you would give to them if they're feeling this episode and really want to delve a bit deeper?
I think there's a lot of freedom that comes with just getting rid of always trying to be good enough by someone else's standards. I think it's a really heavy burden and a heavy weight that you carry on your shoulders when you're continuously trying to be good enough by someone else's standards. I think take the message that I am who I am. I am who I'm going to be. I will be who I want to be. and go with that. Don't compare yourself to other people, because I think if you do that and you ask yourself, am I good enough, or am I going to be better than good enough to someone else's standards, I don't think you'll
never be good enough if you always compare,
because you're always continuously comparing yourself. So set your own standard, set your own destination that you want to go, and then don't even ask yourself the question, tell yourself, I am more than good enough to achieve this. 100%. And that's the only thing that you need to remember.
Definitely. I like it.
I like it. Do you have any tips for the audience?
I'm just still stuck on this idea of wanting to be good enough. Forget about being good enough. Be amazing at everything. And like I mentioned earlier, us as humans, it's in our natural ability to just stay where we're comfortable.
Yeah.
And it's like, because for me, once you've reached that point of being good enough, what happens next? And that's in all areas of life. I mean, like, you pass your driving test and you start driving. You never really try to improve and become a better driver. You know, you get with someone and you're like just a good enough partner, but you're not trying to be great and, you know, fulfill and talk their love language and all of these fancy things. So for me, I'm more about, okay, get to good enough, but then don't stay there. So my final word of advice is, good enough is not good enough. And that's Amen. It. That's it. Good enough is not good enough. I don't care what your standard is, but being good enough is not good enough, because you're here listening to this and watching this for a reason. And the reason is because you don't want to be good enough. You don't want to be mediocre. You want to excel. You want to be bloody brilliant. And if you want to be bloody brilliant, you've got to do things.
It sounds so cockney. You want to be bloody brilliant.
Well, if you want to be brilliant, you got to be willing to do things that other people won't do. Yeah. And I think
my actually favourite quote of all time, my second favourite quote,
you're a joke,
is to be someone you've never been, you have to do something you've never done.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think
Gem.
Don't rely on other people to make you feel good enough, because there will be people who you cross paths with, particularly at work, who don't feel good enough in themselves and therefore won't give you the praise or the recognition or the acceptance that you may be deserving, but because they don't get it themselves, they're not willing to give it out to other people. And if you're relying on that to give yourself that confidence boost or give yourself that feeling of, yeah, do you know what, I am good enough, then you're relying too much on other people rather than your own source, and your source is more important than anything else. So that would be my final word.
I love it. Well, guys, I hope you really enjoyed this episode. Join us next Sunday at 2:00 for our next one. Don't forget to rate and review the podcast, subscribe to YouTube, and follow us on Instagram at The High Grade Podcast.
Oh, and also follow our personal Instagrams. Mine is @Shinnel__.
And mine is @ShannelB_.
See you next week.
Bye.
Bye. I like it.
I like it a lot.